Good afternoon, everyone. This is Mayor Cyril Jefferson convening the High Point City Council for our special meeting. Here with us at the table is every member of council, save Councilmember Johnson, who will be attending virtually. Our first order of business is to have an adoption of our agenda. I'll ask for a motion to adopt.
Motion to adopt.
Second.
Second's been made by Mayor Pro Tem Holmes and seconded by Councilmember Peters. Any discussion on the motion for our agenda? Hearing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any against? The ayes have it, and our agenda passes. First item is item 2025-023, Summary of Senate Bill 166, Changes and Impacts. For this item, we have our Assistant City Manager, Damon DeCane, and we'll pass it over to Damon.
Good afternoon, Mayor, members of council. As the Mayor said, Damon DeCane, Assistant City Manager. I have with me my most capable assistant, Reggie Hucks, Director of Inspection Services. So we're going to go over for you just a real quick summary of Senate Bill 166. I think many of you received emails from the league last September, October timeframe or so, talking about the changes that were involved with this. So we're just going to kind of go through the nuances of that, and feel free to stop us at any time and ask any questions that you may have. So a quick recap. It was an omnibus bill. It included both building and land use planning changes. A lot of these were sought by the home building industry. The league, along with municipalities like us and legislators, worked together on the content of it. It was vetoed by the governor. However, that was overridden on September 29th. So, well, and each slide is going to talk about the change and then whether that change has an impact on the city of High Point or not. The first one was that it prohibits a local government from requiring an existing customer to put a cross-connection control device in unless a hazard determination is made by the utility to the state. So backflow preventers are already required if there's a hazard present. So there's no impact to that. We look at each of these on a case-by-case basis, and if the hazard condition warrants it, then it's a requirement. And what these devices do, just in case nobody's familiar, is you'll hear it called a back siphon or something like that. So if water pressure should drop in the system, typically below 20 pounds, these devices keep anything that's being on the customer side. So if you had hoses and tanks of, say, chemicals, it wouldn't allow those to be sucked back into the water distribution system and then get into anyone's drinking water. So that's the purpose of the device. So the city's already compliant with that.
Building plan review. As some of you might know, years ago, we were in the news for our response time on building plan review. I think the plan review times were 2 months in arrears. When I come on board and we changed the departments, one of the requirements was we got to fix the building plan review piece. That 2-month delay went down to 2 weeks, and we're now 3 to 5 days out. So any plan review we have from a building inspections department, we have that out in 3 to 5 days with the decision. Same with the residential. The residential goes out the door. Unless it's townhouses, it goes out as soon as the other departments sign off on it. Without a review, it reviews done in the field. Townhouses are done by us, but it's with the same 3 to 5 day timeline. So we're no impact. I think it was 15 days? 20 days on the law. Then they have another one for commercial size, 45 days. We're way ahead of those requirements.
Certificate of occupancy.
Change of occupancy, certificate of occupancy. So they won't let us hold COs up for landscaping or for site lighting. We have to go ahead and let people occupy a building. Those things can be under bond, perhaps. Bond with the planning department or planning does the lighting too.
Right.
So we can be under bond, but we won't hold a CO up for landscaping or for site lighting.
There's a change for curb and gutter design. It prohibits a local government from requiring things above and beyond what NCDOT requires. There's no impact to the city because our standards do not exceed NCDOT's standards. Sidewalks prohibits cities from requiring developer to construct sidewalks for small residential subdivisions located in the ETJ, the extraterritorial jurisdiction, unless the city's going to accept long-term maintenance of that. The city, we don't maintain pedestrian sidewalks outside of the city limits. Subdivisions would typically be required to annex into the city. We wouldn't just leave them sitting in the ETJ. This may warrant a text amendment to the UDO. So as we go through the UDO process here in the very near future, we'll keep this on the radar for consideration.
So, Damon, what does small mean?
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, does it mean you subdivide a lot into just 2 parcels and then build a house for your son and your daughter? Or we don't really know. I don't know that we can get the specific wording for that. But again, typically developers, when they're going to come in and want to develop, they're going to come into the city because they want the other services that go along with it. This is mine, right?
Yes.
Improvement inspections. That's right. So improvement of inspection of improvements, meaning water, sewer, those sort of site improvements. Requires inspection of those improvements subject to a performance guarantee within 30 days of the request. If we disagree on whether the improvements meet our local specs, then the developer can obtain certification under an outside engineer's seal. So for example, if we had the stormwater infrastructure was put in the ground and the developer sends a camera through it and it comes back to the city and our inspectors disagree with the developer on whether those repairs are necessary or not before we'll take ownership of it, the developer has the ability to have a third-party engineer look at it, and if they approve it, then the city can accept it. We were proud to be a little bit ahead of the curve on this one. Judy's not in agreement back there that the city was sort of piloting that. And so we had already agreed to accept third-party inspections, and we've had a couple of developments that have taken advantage of this, so there's no impact to the city on that. Local fire prevention code, it prevents a local government from adopting prevention code standards beyond those that are in the residential code. I am not the fire marshal, however, I did consult him on this slide. There's no impact to the city on that. The city fire code does not regulate anything in the residential code. What the fire code does address is the access to water, so hydrant placement, hydrant flows, and access to the site, whether that needs to be a certain width or a certain size depending on the type of vehicles that'll be responding. So that's all it does, but no impact to the city on that.
Code permit technicians. This has been in the works for about 3 or 4 years, and we developed a policy 2 years ago with HR's help so that we could promote our permit specialists when this certification became available. And the legislature approved it. However, the Office of the State Fire Marshal will not push it through because they say they don't have the manpower to work to get this whole program developed. So we're at a stalemate. We would love to see this move on through the system so we could have our permit specialists certified. And of course, it would mean more certification. It would mean a promotion, more money for them. So we're looking forward to this. If DOI ever or OSFM ever gets it moving, and we hope it's soon.
Okay. Scope of professional services, this clarifies that the local government won't make administrative decisions on the work covered by a licensed architect or engineer. Those designs that are sealed and affixed to plans, we only verify that the licensure of the individual is active. So we don't comment on the scope of work for those things.
And if I could make one comment on that, one of the reasons this is in there is because an architect might do some engineering, and it's minimal, and some departments would say, you can't do that because you're an architect, you're not an engineer, or an engineer might do a little architectural design, egress, whatnot, and some departments would say, no, we're not going to accept that because you're not an architect. So they wrote this law so that the inspections department would take the seal and just move it on.
Artificial turf. Artificial turf for the purposes of local stormwater programs is not considered a built-upon area. Is there any questions on that? So that basically would be just like as if there was natural turf in place. So the city has viewed artificial turf with an under-drain system as a pervious surface. That is not considered built-upon area. We do feel that though a formal text amendment to the UDO is likely needed for this. So again, as we go through the UDO process, we'll go ahead and update the UDO in that case, but we'll also comply with the law. as written.
So the unlikely event that somebody just throws some artificial turf on a piece of concrete, that wouldn't count?
No, sir, it would not. It would be a good try, but we would let that go.
I have a quick question on the previous slide about the one about the scope of professional services. So does that mean that if an architect is licensed and has the, they can do a site plan without a civil engineer or not? Would you still need a civil engineer for a site plan?
That's what that was the reason they wrote the law,
Okay,
for things
okay.
like that.
Okay, awesome. All right, thank you.
Oh, unauthorized conditions. It's been a while since we put this together, so I apologize. Prohibits public water and sewer systems from imposing unauthorized conditions for residential development. So in some places, apparently there were negotiations regarding conditional rezoning that were imposed through utility development agreements. This portion also restricts local governments from using conditions as metrics for scoring or a preference system to allocate water and sewer among residential development applicants. That practice has never been employed here at the city. We bring every project in, and it's based on what's available and based on the numbers that come in. There's no ranking system. There's no priority system. Everybody is treated fairly here at the city, so there's no impact to us on that.
3 and 4 family dwellings, this is an interesting one. So we have two building codes, the residential building code and the commercial building code. 4 family dwellings was considered an apartment building. Now it is treated as a 1 or 2 family dwelling in its scope and the application, code application. So what does that mean? That means I can build a 4 family dwelling without sprinkler system and 1 egress point, just like I would a house. It could be done in the commercial code, except you'd have to use a sprinkler system in the commercial code. Now the sprinkler system could be eliminated with fire separation. This is going to be extremely interesting in places like the beach because they're already building a single family dwelling in there with 20 bedrooms. So now we're looking at 4 connected with, this could really grow into something big. However, in the name of density, and Judy likes that word, they looked at this, and it is a more cost-effective way to build. And of course, density is important. So this has been added, and they're developing the code language now. This is a code change year. This year is going to be an interesting year. Code will be available now in July. It's supposed to be available January 1, but now it's July, and it's going to be a hard date. So they're working on these. The code language for these, right now we use an alternate method, but we'll see it soon. So we can do it now, by the way. It's legal now.
That concludes our presentation.
Thank you. Are there any questions for staff or council?
May I have something?
Judy, yeah, please.
Thank you. I just want to say that I was involved in some of the drafting of this bill, but there was nothing happening in High Point that made us think we needed to add anything for High Point. I'd like to thank Reggie for always looking at these bills and letting us know if there's anything problematic in it. And just thank y'all for being High Point.
Thank you, Judy.
Thank you, Judy.
I do have one question. Damon, you recall some meetings we've been having with developers, and we talked about that third-party certification on certain improvements, whether it's a concrete pipe underneath the ground, as you said, or another part. Part of what I recall, and this may be going down a rabbit hole here, but part of what I recall is the reason why sometimes there is disagreement between staff and a developer on accepting a certain repair is because ultimately we want to ensure before we accept it for our maintenance that we don't accept something that inherently has an issue, which could later come back to bite us in the butt. Because if it has that issue, then down the road we have to pay for it, which means the taxpayers have to pay for it. And in this world of seeing crazy natural disasters, everyone wants to point fingers about whose fault it was for something. I am curious, and again, this is going down a rabbit hole, and now I'm going to get into legal terms here, Megan. But I'm worried about liability. If city accepts something that a third party certifies, and our staff vehemently feel like whatever that crack was in the concrete, it's gonna give us issues down the road, and we're gonna have to pay for that. I wonder if you're able to recoup some of your funds that you have to pay for from that third-party certifier. And that, again, that is a very nuanced question, but I think you get where I'm going on this.
I do, if I may. So, staff and a licensed professional are never going to allow something that has that potential to pass. And that's the whole point of having a licensed professional from whoever installed it on their side look at it as well. Because they would be liable under licensure to a certain degree. But if there was a flaw that was that concerning, we've rarely had an issue with anyone building infrastructure where we came across a serious flaw where they weren't willing to repair it. So all the contractors, the engineers, and those folks that are out doing that, they're all, especially working for the development community, because that's great work, right? And it's steady work and it keeps coming, and so they want to do the best job they can, and they want to keep us satisfied because we use a lot of the same people as well. So while there is, I guess, a chance that could happen, I'm confident that the folks who are developing here that we have experience with, and those who may be coming here, they are trying to do their best. And typically when it gets down to the issues of, say, a crack in a pipe, it's really down to sort of, the final stages, because all the major stuff has been addressed. So nothing really is left with a major concern for staff at that point, where we're ready to accept an outside opinion.
So, and I'll just add on to that's why the contracts are so important. So typically, the city uses its own agreement for services, which would be with general contractors, and we have an agreement for professional services, which are contracts with the design professionals like the architects, engineers, and surveyors. And in that, we have standard language in order to protect the city in the event of litigation. My job as the attorney is to think about worst case scenario, but in a worst case scenario, should something happen and there be an issue, we're gonna look to that contract to govern who's responsible and where the liability comes from. So we have been seeing an increase in requests from third parties to negotiate our contract language. I'd say probably over the past handful of years, we've received more requests for negotiating things like indemnification, liability, capping damages, limiting the categories of damages that they could be held responsible for. And so I think it's really important in light of things like this and in light of what Mayor you kind of talked about, that we think really critically about negotiating those contracts on the front end of relationships and agreeing to that.
Yeah, it seems like this law, and I get it, David, I completely get your point. Part of me wonders how the law kneecaps some of our leverage in some of these negotiations on contracts, because our leverage before, and not that we willingly impose this leverage, but it was that we don't have to accept that pipe if we're not ready, period. But that says within 30 days, if you still disagree, then they can just go get a third-party person to certify it. And so I wonder how that puts us in the pickle. Again, looking at our time here, we can always hash this out later, but let the record reflect we talked about it.
And not to belabor the point, but I think if you look at the building side of the house, third-party inspections have been in place for some time.
They have, and if they give us a third-party certification, we have to accept it. We don't have a choice.
May I add something here?
Yeah, absolutely.
Speaking from the private side, it would be very difficult, if not impossible, to find somebody that has a license to seal something that is going to fail.
Thank you for that. Thank you all so much.
Sir.
We're going to transition next item, 2025-019. This is Southwest Mill District presentation, and we have some guests here with us. We want to welcome you all to this meeting. And we'll pass it to Andy Piper to cue us up for this presentation.
Yep. Good evening, everyone. Andy Piper, Planning Administrator. I'm just going to kick it off here and introduce our guests. We've been working and collaborating with the Southwest Renewal Foundation and Dover Coal & Partners. Margaret Flippin and Amy Groves are going to do the presentation, so I'm just going to turn it over to them. I'll have a few words at the end. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Council and City Manager, for welcoming us this afternoon and for being able to provide this briefing. We're really excited about what's been going on in the Southwest, as well as what's to come. And so what we've been working on, intensely the past 6 to 7 months, but we started with the blueprints for Southwest High Point in 2023. And what you'll see today is we're presenting the initial draft of the Southwest Mill District Area Plan, as well as we're going to begin to introduce some components with regards to zoning district regulations. But I want to express our gratitude to the City of High Point as well as the Southwest Renewal Foundation. The Southwest Renewal Foundation has been funding our work as planners through a grant received by the State of North Carolina Economic Development. And we're grateful for the partnership with the City of High Point, working closely with your planning staff and others to help to craft these documents that help the planning to move forward. So I wanted to say thank you for that. Some of the things that we hope to cover today is sort of the purpose and the intent of the area plan, our plans with regards to public and community engagement, and some of the technical components of the area plan. So as you all are beginning your review, you can start to keep some of these things in mind, as well as moving towards some zoning text and map amendments to the land development regulations. What we were able to pass out to you this afternoon is sort of an overview of the Southwest Mill District. I thought this might be helpful for all of us, ourselves included, as we start to get some questions. This sort of outlines out some of the key components that you can share with others. There's also, we'll share in just a moment, there's a link to a website that the city has created as well. So what is the Southwest Mill District? Coming out of many of your previous plans and policies, looking at increased and continued reinvestment and revitalization in Southwest High Point, and primarily in the area with a lot of the historic mills as industry and manufacturing has changed, recognizing that that's a legacy for High Point, but also as industry is changing and it's shifting more to a light industrial component, is there the opportunity to add additional uses in with those land development regulations and in those zones to create a more robust district. And so the intent of the Southwest Mill District is to create a walkable, connected, mixed-use district along the Heritage Greenway. So a huge opportunity there with this green spine coming through the area. Outlined in yellow there, and we'll also provide a lot of this information digitally to you all as well, so you can take a closer look. But this sort of outlines out the main study area along West Green, heading all the way down to Ward, bound by the railroad tracks. And then sort of we went basically one parcel to the east of West Green, and then up around the area around 300 Oak as well. And it's really interesting when we started to get into the details of this, looking at the existing land use and studying the incredible maps and imagery you all have through your geographic information systems, and really looking at that data. The predominant land use in that area is industrial. But when you really look at what's actually being used, even though the land use may be industrial, but there's actually 118 properties that are underutilized, which totals 29% of the developable land in that area. So it represents an opportunity to sort of fill in some of those lost spaces, and especially looking at recommendations from the comprehensive plan that sort of looks to shift some of your growth and redevelopment in town. There's a huge opportunity right here, right close to downtown, to really look at some redevelopment and reinvestment. This is not new to High Point. You all have some amazing examples currently in the city where private and public investors have come together to transform industrial buildings, whether it's Congdon Yards or the Market Square. This is the Cohab building. There's a lot of energy in cities across the country right now to do this. You've got some amazing historic architecture, and what a lot of folks are looking for is that character of place. And so, for example, like in Charlotte, they've created a mill district as, you know, the state of North Carolina, as the economy has changed over time, and these incredible structures are being repurposed and reused rather than demolished. And so there's an opportunity to create some really incredible opportunities of reuse as well as adding in. This is Judson Mill. This is in Greenville, South Carolina, and an opportunity to mix residential with other uses as well. And I share these examples because as we've been doing our work, we didn't just look at these for the pictures and the preservation and the reuse, but we actually looked at the city regulations and at their city policies. How did they get this to happen? How did they get there? What were the economic development strategies? What were the land regulation strategies that they used? And so a lot of these examples contributed to the work that we were able to do, as well as recognizing the Greenway as an economic driver. And so we went on to research the city of Atlanta and the Beltline, and how did they make that happen? And what were those regulations that went to support the Beltline so that it's not just an idea on paper, but you actually have the policies and regulations to support the built result. So these are the types of things that we've been researching. But the main thing that you all have going is your existing policy and plans. This is not new, this idea of a mill district or revitalization in the Southwest. And so we're encouraged by the previous plans, especially your comprehensive plan. 2019, you had a smart growth plan, the Smart Growth America plan that looked at the mill area and looked at the changing economic structure from industrial to more of a mix of uses. In 2023, working with Renewal Foundation on the blueprints for Southwest High Point, where we were able to start to look at some of these areas and what could be, and looking at the focus of walkable streets and sort of a change over time. This is Green Drive, a potential for redevelopment, so looking again at the before and the after. So these were sort of ideas that start to shape that vision. With the comprehensive plan, looking at Southwest High Point as a town center, and then the intent of the area plan. You want to take this for a minute? I'm talking too fast. I'm like, I'm gonna.
And so, the area plan, it kind of describes those big ideas, preserving the physical character as well as supporting strategic infill, having a mix of building and housing types, improving quality of life. All of these things, can work together, and what we're looking at are, what are those things about the physical environment that can help to make these things come to be. So with the area plan, one of the big takeaways is, we have all these big ideas, how can we make them happen? So we're looking at a zoning district or the regulations. So we want to get the regulations in line with the vision in order to implement that. So there's, today, looking at the zoning map, there's, a series of, it's mostly, you can see the purples are the light industrial and the heavy industrial, but a mixture of, a few other zones in the area as well. But they're, not necessarily, the rules aren't specific to shape the vision that we, we're just looking at in those precedent photos or in the imagery. So what we've been looking at are, how can we make those regulations, be more specific? And then do you want to?
Yeah, thanks. As you can tell, we're very passionate about our work, and this is by far, I'm just so excited about this and so enthusiastic for all the good things to come. But really encouraged by what you all were able as a community with the comprehensive plan and the policies and the strategies that you were putting forward. And one of those components is looking at the zoning and the land development regulations. We know that you all have a busy year or two ahead as you start to look at a citywide change to a lot of these regulations. But from the comprehensive plan, looking at the idea of creating a transitional industrial district. And so what this is still being able to focus on industry, but it's smaller scale industry, and understanding that High Point's long history of industry and manufacturing is crucial to the identity of your city. So it's still embracing that, but it's more focused on, as industry and manufacturing have changed, more focused on clean, non-toxic manufacturing. And by doing that, you can have that mix of uses in the proximity to create a walkable center. So this is from the comprehensive plan. As I said, we were very encouraged by what you all have in place with regards to policy and strategy. And so we were excited through the Southwest Renewal Foundation and working with the city of High Point to start to begin to think about what does this mean and what does this really look like when you get into the policy and the regulatory documents. And so looking at the idea, as Amy said, of creating a Southwest Mill District zoning district. Okay, so we have the area plan that will be presented to you all in the coming weeks, but then actually what are those regulations to begin to implement those plan ideas? So now what we're gonna do now is sort of walk through some of these initial plan ideas, initial implementation strategies, so you all can start thinking about what's to come with regards to zoning change and possibilities.
Okay,
I got a, I mean, maybe it's getting ahead, but this down zoning thing the state just passed, how does that,
Yeah, I'll touch on that at the end.
okay, all right, because that's a
Yeah.
big concern of mine. So, not just to this, but the whole 2045 plan is a major concern.
Sure.
So,
We're looking really at two different sub-districts in this area. And so the darker shade here is the town center, the area right around 300 Oak, and that's the area that, was the focus of that, of the comprehensive plan. And then the transitional industrial, which is the balance of the area. So again, this is that rendering from your comp plan. I'm sure you all are familiar with it. We've been, zooming in and really looking at, what are the details, what's being shown here. So, it's really a mix of uses. There's living spaces as well as maker spaces and places to gather. New buildings mixed in with reusing existing buildings. We see the greenway coming through, there's, street trees, and most importantly, the buildings are street oriented. That means, they face out towards the street with the public facade, really shaping that street space, shaping the pedestrian realm. I think that's the most important thing here in the town center. It's where people come together. So we want to have the good public facades of buildings facing out and creating that public space. Looking here in three-dimensionally at the corner of Green Drive and Grimes, this was an illustration of, what could happen under current development regulations, but what we're really hoping is to see instead, that vision from the blueprint. So, how can we get those buildings, again, oriented towards the street? There's still parking, but it's tucked behind the buildings. So, kind of thinking about how that street space really reinforces and creates a place where people want to gather and come together. The transitional industrial is a little different. So it's, there's opportunities to do street-oriented buildings like that, but then also it's, a little bit more flexible so that this is where you have some of the larger existing buildings. And so, but the one key thing that holds it all together is this idea of pedestrian connectivity through the area. So here is an existing conditions at Enos and Tyron Avenue. And so we imagined, well, what could happen if that building came back to life and saw some new users come in there. And then, over time, you have the regulations in place that you're setting up for, a more walkable condition in the future. And so, more new buildings could come in there and kind of complete that vision. So kind of breaking that down, we look at, well, what are the things about those buildings that make them walkable? And there are things like, having no blank walls, but having a good transparent building that faces out onto the street. Things like having a mix of uses, things like having a cornice line. So, all these little details just kind of make it pedestrian scale and way for, that these buildings shape quality public spaces. This darker blue shade that I just added in, so that's now the street improvements. So we've been talking about the zoning regulations and how buildings are shaped, but that's supporting this more pedestrian-oriented future development form. So, there's really four main ideas in the zoning district that we are hoping to achieve. And I'm gonna walk through them here in just a minute. Having a mix of uses, connecting pedestrians, shaping that southwest town center area, and then encouraging, just more activity and reusing underutilized spaces. So the key thing with the mix of uses, if you dive into the details, this is the chart. You can see on the end here, the town center and transition industrial zones, just allowing a broad mix of residential within this area that has, a lot of industrial uses today. So as far as connecting pedestrians, a few key things, introducing building design standards. So some of those things that we were calling out about the buildings, like no blank walls and, having, high quality facades that face the streets. So having some rules for folks who are adding new buildings that will reinforce that. We introduced an idea of a pedestrian frontage. So that's something that's a requirement for in the front of buildings that there's space for sidewalk as well as a planting zone. So it kind of sets up that relationship of the building to the street and that, pedestrian connectivity through the area. Thirdly, just requiring screening of things like outdoor storage or solid waste. So when you're in the street space, those things, obviously we still need those things to support our buildings, but they're screened from view of pedestrians on the street. Parking is always a big question because we need parking to support our businesses, but we also want to make sure that parking is not taking away from the pedestrian area. So similar to the MX district, the proposal is to not have off-street parking required, but rather it can be up to the market to dictate, how much parking is needed to support those uses. And then importantly, that it's located to the side or the rear of buildings, and this introduces a parking setback. So it's not within 25 feet of the sidewalk. So just kind of getting parking in the right place for pedestrian-oriented buildings. The Greenway itself, we're proposing, it's like a street, right? So a pedestrian street, it's going to be a very important public space. So for new buildings to come in, that they should follow the same rules as if they were fronting onto a street. So, the no blank walls. And so the Greenway is either going to be shaped by new buildings or by a landscaped yard area. So, really to create that high quality public space. As far as shaping development in the town center, one of the most important things, this is the chart of setbacks and height. And so the most important thing is that there's a minimum and also a maximum setback in that town center area. So new buildings will come within proximity of the sidewalk and really help to shape the public space. And so, just kind of to summarize the broader mix of uses and the pedestrian frontage, those are things that we're all hoping to, really encourage this activity. And so as new buildings come in and as buildings are reused over time, these rules really help to shape the space. Importantly, I want to mention, that we the most green building is probably an existing building because it's already there, and we want to encourage existing buildings to be reused over time. And so there's a provision that as long as buildings don't increase their degree of nonconformity, we want to see them continue to be reused and over time. So a lot of these rules we're talking about for the facades, that those come into play primarily with new infill buildings happening in the district.
As far as input being gathered, we will be having a public meeting tomorrow night. So a lot of this is building on the input gathered from the comprehensive plan as well as the blueprints for Southwest High Point. But public input is essential, and so we're beginning with the review of the draft area plan. We also have a website set up on the city's webpage, as well as an online survey that folks will have access to. So even if they're not able to come to the meeting tomorrow night at 5:30, that they still have access to comment and review the plan documents and materials. Now I'll turn it over to Andy, who can give that summary from the...
Okay, so yes, now turning to Session Law 2024-57, which you may have referred to as SB 382. So this was effective, similar to the previous where it was vetoed and then the veto was overridden. So it has become law effective December 11th. This was the Hurricane Helene Relief Bill, which many things were tacked on to the end of. It redefined what is considered downzoning. So we've had this provision in place before, but what they've added essentially in addition to where it talks about downzoning being reducing the amount of density and also the reducing the amount of land uses. They've also added things like non-conforming, and you can see the list here, but pretty much any kind of change to the lot. An example we've used is like, hey, you want to screen the solid waste facilities? Well, that wasn't there before, so now introducing that would become a non-conforming site element. So what it essentially did, though, is took away the city's ability to initiate any kind of zoning map amendment or a text amendment without getting written consent from every affected property owner. So in this case, we're looking at approximately 270 properties within the proposed Southwest Mill District boundary with 130 plus owners of those properties. So we're in the process of kind of gathering that and trying to understand what is the scope of trying to get written consent, and working with Megan as well, like what does the written consent look like, kind of what are the rules here. So again, this is all new. There's a lot more questions than answers at this point. But it will impact our kind of proposed timeline going forward. If you could advance one slide there. So our next steps, as Margaret and Amy mentioned, we have our meeting tomorrow night to go to the public. We've been working on this. Now we're bringing it to the public. There's going to be a public comment period for 30 days through mid-February. One thing to be clear about, though, is we have kind of three elements. We have an area plan, we have the zoning map amendment, and we have the text amendment. The area plan is not affected, so we can move forward with adopting the area plan. That doesn't require the written consent of the property owners. So we envision that going to our February P&Z hearing, and then that would go forward to City Council at your second March meeting on the 24th, where we could have the public hearing and adopt the area plan. So the area plan basically establishes the vision. This is what we want to do. So we can go forward with that. Now, after that is where we, things are going to depend a great deal on how we address the new session law. So I put here tentatively, there has also been talk about the legislature fixing this. There's a lot of communities that are in kind of a bind with this. So what that is and when that occurs, again, up in the air, we don't know exactly. But there's a possibility that they fix it and they fix it quickly, in which case we could move forward like we were originally anticipating, which would go to at the same time as you're adopting the area plan, you then could initiate the zoning map amendment. And then that would put it on track for an April P&Z meeting. And that would be both the zoning map and the text amendment. And then it would go forward to your May meeting. So ideally, we're looking at May. Reality, it's going to depend. And it depends on how quickly we can gather signatures or if the law gets fixed.
Thank you for the information. Is there more on the slide you want to keep going, or is it time for questions?
Time for questions.
Awesome. Council, are there any questions for staff or for Dover Co. at this time?
So Andy, how does that affect the 2045, the UDO and this downzoning?
Yeah, good
I mean,
question.
it seems untenable really to go around collecting 131 signatures. 'Cause it don't only take one, right? To say-
Well, it would mean they couldn't be part of the district. So you could see kind of what I would call a Swiss cheese district, where those that signed are in and those that are out are not. Then we can look at kind of Plan Bs if we had to do that. Some may not have nonconformities. I mean, that's, I guess, a question, like, which ones could we include without getting the written consent? If you got a vacant parcel with nothing in it, you're not creating any nonconforming maps. So we would have to look and see kind of as we go. Now, with your point about the UDO, like trying to get the signature of every property owner in High Point, obviously that's completely unrealistic. There are, one of the kind of really unfortunate provisions of this was retroactive 6 months.
Sure.
So they had folks that were adopted a new ordinance and were accepting applications for new zoning that then was washed away. So what do? Now they've got applications for a zoning district that doesn't exist. So we are hopeful, or maybe optimistic, that there's some kind of fix, especially before we would get to the point that we're looking at mid-2026 before the full UDO update would be coming back to you. So hopefully it would get fixed. If not, we're gonna have to come up with what is Plan B.
Yeah, Dr. Herman, if I can, I think that the best advice is in most municipalities are taking kind of a wait and see approach. So there's certainly been discussion of a potential fix in the shorter versus the long term. Certainly we can't control that, but we're kind of to take the wait and see approach and to continue on parallel paths. One, to see what happens at the General Assembly, and one, to continue with our projects, not necessarily, stop in our tracks, but to think about, like Andy said, for this, if we're truly only talking about 130 property owners, that could be a potential for staff to get consent from them. But if it was something that affected all of the citizens, then that would not be a great option. But I think it's a wait and see approach is the most prudent one.
And Megan, if I could just add, we sent notices to all the property owners about this meeting tomorrow night. And on Andy's desk, there is a stack about that tall of ones that were returned. So that's just a whole nother thing to add to the mix. So if we
You got a lot of
can't
LLCs,
get
trusts, churches, I mean, who signs?
Yeah, property detective to actually find out who owns these properties, right?
Megan or Andy, just for my clarification, the consent, is this a blanket consent or is this a consent that needs to be
Specific to
each change?
Each parcel. Right, so it would be, if you look at the language, it was, if you go back to that slide, it's if it qualifies under the new definition, adding that second one about creating nonconformities, then now there's been no guidance, and certainly there's not been enough time to develop any case law about what written consent means. Is that something that if we've located an email address and they sent back and said, I'm giving the consent, or if, certainly we will start with just kind of a one-page document, should we need to get to that point, saying that your property listed here that certifies that they have the ability to provide consent on behalf of that property. For example, LLCs and companies, we'd have to look and see who the registered agent is and see who's able to provide consent on that behalf. Because
What if the property changes hands?
it would have to be whoever, when the zoning map amendment and/or the text amendment go forward, it would have to be the owner at that time. So then if it changes hands, then right, it's already happened. We've already gotten the consent of the owner at the time that the amendment was made.
Could that be challenged?
Well, any of this could be challenged because it's so brand new. We don't have any idea yet. And the only language we have is written consent. So like I said, there's really been nobody that's challenged that yet or what that could look like. I certainly would recommend us, again, to kind of go down the parallel paths of continuing on the paths that we are while we see what happens at the General Assembly and then see what other jurisdictions do. It's my understanding from some, information that I've gotten that I think that's probably the most prudent path. Some jurisdictions are thinking about looking for local legislation to get exempted from it. I don't know that that would be worthwhile or valuable, but we're certainly considering all of that. For this specific matter, I think because it's such a smaller subset versus the general override, the general overview and redoing the development ordinance, I think with this, it's kind of prudent to continue and see how it goes.
Any other questions?
Maybe, or a couple comments, the vision, the work, the pictures, I think it's great. Would be lovely to see it become a fruition down the road. But I just have maybe some clarification for me, like as you're doing these processes. And when you showed a picture of Atlanta and showed a picture of Greenville, and then Megan, you said, well, this is all new. So I'm not connecting right there. What are we gonna take from the others that have supposedly been down this road, yet we're entering something new?
If I could clarify,
Sure.
By new, I meant the legislation that we just got.
I agree.
Yeah.
Okay. So,
But also,
go ahead.
well, what we were looking at was, as we were drafting the initial text for a new zoning district, we created something using we created something best practices from what we've seen as professionals, as well as what other cities have been successful in their policies.
Right.
And so it would be a new zoning district in your UDO. It would be under a special district. Originally, when we began this work back in June, we looked at creating a new mixed-use district using one of your existing zones, but then that sort of transferred into an entirely new zoning district that would become a special district. So it would be new, but it's also learning from what's existing in the city as well as what other municipalities have had success with.
And in your work or anybody else gathered here, can somebody help? What is your definition of modern day industry? It's used in the handout here.
I think a lot of what we're seeing now and what a lot of the economic drivers is smaller scale industry and manufacturing, focusing more, originally when land use and zoning were created, a lot of the original idea with zoning was the separation of land uses because of so many toxic and noxious uses with factories and smoke and terrible things. And so nowadays, as some of the industry has shifted to more of clean energy with more environmental regulations and policies that are supporting that, we're able to see some of those zoning separation of uses sort of start to disappear because the industry is cleaner. But you've got a lot of buildings in the district that are rather large that could accommodate a variety of uses. I think you also have a lot of folks that are looking to invest in the district more on the creative and design side of industry as well. We propose introducing a new category called artisan manufacturing. So looking at more smaller scale, creative people making things. Whether it's a candle maker or a paper maker or a glass blower, just different things that sort of help to support this legacy of creative design in High Point as well. But as far as industry goes, I think there's a lot of opportunities to still see that as an economic driver. It's more geared towards clean and non-toxic.
Yeah, I would jump in and say it's really about the impact. So you look at, are there odor, is there noise, is there, it's the impact on the surrounding neighbors. So what we're seeing more is, hey, you're in that building, you don't know what's going on in there, but that's the idea, that you can be doing things in there without impacting your neighbors. So that's that more lower intensity, modern industry. And there's still a place for the other type, but just not here.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from council?
The only comment that I have is that I feel real super confident that the legislator, they're gonna work it out, because I think both sides of the aisle have been upset with some of the unintended consequences. So I really feel very confident that they're gonna be able to work this out, before March. So I'm glad that we're kind of just moving forward. I also, I had originally wanted a much larger area, but that takes a little bit more work and a little longer. So we really kind of targeted a focused area, so that we can really get that right. So I would really appreciate everyone's support. I think it could be a really great thing for this area, and especially with that urban greenway coming right through, kind of like what we saw in Atlanta, Krog Street Market District. If we get it right, then that greenway will do everything that we hope and pray that it would do, so.
A couple questions. I'm curious, I know we're having the conversations about the greenway, and we're still navigating that with regards to where we can get easements and where our path is gonna be. I know we got Plan A and Plan B. Is it safe to assume Plan A and Plan B would both be inside the footprint of this district right now? So whether we go
For
whichever
the
way.
most part, yeah, there are areas of the greenway that would go beyond this district, yes.
Well, yeah, but
Yes.
in terms of like the main part we're talking about here would still work, okay. The other question, and this probably goes more into SB 382, so we don't have to get into it right now, but felt like there was a qualifier word there in terms of city-initiated zoning changes. Is it correct to assume if a property owner wants their property rezoned, I guess the whole point is that those folks who approved it, that's what matters, is since the city's initiating, we want property owners to consent at this time.
That's right, for the city initiated. Now, you could go to the extreme and ask for consent from a property owner. I've had this discussion actually just on Friday with Mr. Shannon, where there's some commentary coming from, professors and people out there saying, well, do we need consent from every single person? I think you can read into the fact that if somebody applies for a rezoning, that they are consenting to the rezoning of their own property. But since this is all a new law and there really hasn't been any additional administrative regulatory guidance or anything like that coming out, we're looking just at the words and interpreting them from a strict interpretation. I think that means if it's city initiated, then that's when you need it. But there has been commentary out there asking that exact question, Mayor, of what exactly does it look like if it's the property owners initiated? Does that mean that they inherently consent? I think you could definitely make a good faith argument that that does make that. Could it be challenged in the court? Potentially, but who would actually challenge that if the applicant's the property owner? So that's all kind of gonna be fleshed out in the coming days.
Yeah, perfect. Any other questions? I'll echo the notes of, thanks. Dorothy, doesn't get said enough, the hard work that you and your team do at Southwest.
Thank the North Carolina Economic Development Regional Fund.
Yeah. Well, we thank them, but also, thank you.
Do you have a comment, Dorothy? Do you have a comment?
Well, I always thought Phase B could be just do an overlay rather than an actual rezoning like the Atlanta Beltline did. But that hasn't gotten a lot of traction with the Planning and Development Department or the consultants. So, but that would be Plan B to me, to just do an overlay. But I'm an amateur, I don't know anything.
Is that in the chamber as an option if we end up going down this road months from now? And
So I may turn it, because this, we did talk a little bit about, it would be like an optional overlay, so it's like you say, this is where, this is what we want, but until you agree to sign, then it doesn't apply, but if I'm
The
thinking
benefit
of it.
of doing an overlay, if it were to be optional, is the regulations of the overlay, they act as an incentive. If you want to not just have your building limited to light industrial use or heavy industrial use, if you want to have that mix of uses, then that optional overlay district would become very enticing. It would be an incentive to want to have the rezoning to have the overlay district.
Yeah, so basically the property owners would have the choice of their existing zoning or the optional path. And the idea is that you have to you can't pick and choose one regulation from one and one from the other. You have to choose one path or the other. So the downside is that just less predictability because, someone might choose something and someone else chooses something else. So ideally you get everyone to agree on the vision and opt in, everyone all in. But again, it's a plan B that certainly if
definitely.
it's,
And just to add on that, it wouldn't be able to be done at that meeting because it would have to be restructured and rewritten a little bit differently. But it is a plan B that if the legislature doesn't move forward with making a correction, then that's something that could be considered.
We'll look at other options, yeah. I think the main thing is we want it to be a district and not a piecemeal.
Yeah.
So that's the downside, but we'll look at all options once we get to that bridge.
Yeah, this is a very exciting point to see, and I think a point I don't want lost in this conversation is where this sits in our city. 27260 is still amongst the poorest, not only urban zip codes, but poor zip codes in rural in our state. And what this does, maybe to support not only economic growth, but you think about those neighborhoods that this would impact that south side neighborhood and a lot of growth you've seen there with homes being built, so on and so forth. So it's an exciting thing to see investment in areas that have felt like they've been underinvested in for quite some time, and to see this public-private partnership, I think is truly a good case study. And so I've got great confidence too, Mom. I do. Thank y'all.
If I could add one more comment. Also, year-round activity.
Yes.
365, design never goes dark. Jobs, I think, I was talking to somebody earlier, it's like, we need job creation. Don't buy a building and close it up all year except twice a year. That's not what we want. We want job creation. We want economic development. We want growth. We want infill. We want people on the streets. So that's what I hope to see.
Absolutely. All right, Andy and team, Margaret, Dover Cole, thank y'all so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Our next item here is item 2025-022. It's going to close session for discussion on acquisition of real property. This time I entertain a motion for us to go into closed session. Motion's been made by Mayor, excuse me, y'all, excuse me. Motion's been made by Mayor Pro Tem Holmes to go into closed session. The second's been made by Councilmember Moore to go into closed session. Any discussion on that motion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any against? The ayes have it, we're in closed session. Thank you all so much.